My name is Grace West. I'm 39. I served as a sniper and logistics officer in the U.S. Army for 17 years. I've carried weapons most people only see in video games, hit targets others claimed were impossible, and I've been addressed by ranks most never earn. But none of that mattered in that moment, because I was standing in a gun store in rural Nevada, next to my brother Thomas, while he laughed and pointed straight at me. "She just cleans guns," he said loudly, smirking as he swept his hand toward me like I was the punchline to a long joke. Laughter broke out behind the counters. One of the clerks, a guy with a bushy goatee and mirrored sunglasses, nodded along like Thomas was preaching gospel. "She got the coffee too?" someone added from the back. And another chimed in, "Cute patch, sweetheart. Etsy?" The store erupted. Men chuckled. Women gave that pitying smile I've seen my whole life, the one that says "bless your heart" while meaning the opposite. A guy in cargo shorts elbowed his buddy, muttering something crude. Someone else snapped a photo like I was a curiosity, not a customer. I didn't say a word. I just stood there, quiet, steady, and let the wave roll over me. I adjusted the strap of my worn field bag and brushed a loose thread from my shoulder. That's when someone noticed the patch. It was frayed now, its dark stitching faded with time, sun, and silence. Barely legible unless you'd seen one before. But the shape still held, the sharp downward curve of the viper's jaw, the ghost gray outline of a scope's reticle. That patch had once meant something to a handful of people who didn't speak publicly about what we'd done. Thomas saw it too. He snorted. "She still wears that thing? Jesus, Grace. You clean rifles, you don't fire them." More laughter. A teenager nearby mumbled, "I think my grandma's got that same bag." I glanced at Thomas, then past him, past the shelves of ARs and the discount optics displays, past the man with the tactical vest who'd never served a day. And I waited. The bell above the front door jingled, but it wasn't the kind of sound that just marked someone's entrance. It was a shift, like pressure dropping before a storm. Everyone turned at once. The man who stepped through the door didn't speak. He didn't have to. His presence filled the space before his boots even hit the floor. Commander William Ashford, retired technically. But men like him don't fade into the background. His spine was still straight as steel, eyes like he'd already measured the angles of the room before crossing the threshold. People moved instinctively. A path opened up to the front. Even the loud mouth behind the counter stopped spinning his pen. Commander Ashford's gaze swept across the store, shelves, faces, dust-speckled light from the windows until it landed on me, not on my face, not on my shoulder. He saw the patch, the viper. And that was when the room changed. He paused, took 2 deliberate steps forward. Then, he stood to attention. His right hand came up slow, crisp, deliberate. A salute, not for show, not performative. This was a soldier's salute. Weighted, solemn. "Major West," he said. His voice wasn't loud, but it carried. "The bravest we ever had." Silence. I could hear someone swallow. Thomas, still beside me, lowered his arm like it had turned to lead. His smirk cracked at the corners, slipping. I watched his jaw tighten as realization swept in. No one spoke. The store that had been filled with snickers and smug chuckles was dead quiet. The kind of quiet that feels like judgment without anyone needing to say a word. I nodded once in acknowledgement. My expression neutral. I didn't offer explanation. I didn't bask. I didn't boast. That wasn't why I came. But in that moment, the question behind every pair of wide eyes had already formed. Who is she, really? And more than that, why did her own brother mock her like that? You want to know how we got here? Let me take you back. Before the patch, before the salute, before my brother's laughter ever turned sharp. We grew up in a house where silence was survival. Our father was military, old school. Believed discipline was love. And if you didn't meet his expectations, you didn't earn his time. For Thomas, those expectations were a script he fit right into. Big, loud. Always first in the door, whether it was a room or a fight. He got medals for peewee football and praise for elbowing kids twice his size. Me? I was quiet. Didn't mean I was weak, just measured. While Thomas was wrestling in the mud, I was in the barn with Granddad's rusted .22, stacking tin cans and watching wind patterns in the trees. I learned to breathe with the earth, learned that stillness could carry further than force. But no one saw that. To our parents, I was the girl, the helper, the shadow, the one who'd probably become a teacher or a nurse, something safe, something quiet. They gave Thomas the compass. I got the dish towel. He used to say, "Grace just likes to organize things." He wasn't wrong. I liked structure, gear in the right place, tools in the right hands. I liked the rhythm of assembly and disassembly, the click of metal when everything aligned. But what Thomas missed, what he still misses, is that sometimes the ones who organize the gear are the ones who know how to use it best. He joined ROTC. I enlisted directly. He rolled his eyes when I shipped out. "Don't get in over your head, Grace," he said. "Stick to cleaning rifles." I did. At first, then I earned one, then I used it. And I never missed. We weren't close anymore, even back then. Letters stopped. Holidays got shorter. He went corporate after a brief stint in logistics. I stayed in, moved forward, moved up, kept my patch. But he never asked, until the day we walked into that store together, and he thought I was still the shadow. He forgot that the quiet ones remember, and that some patches aren't for show, they're earned. I enlisted the week after my 19th birthday. It wasn't a grand gesture. I didn't march into a recruiter's office with a burning need to prove anything to anyone. Truth be told, it was quiet. I just walked in, signed the paperwork, and waited for the world to shift beneath my feet. It did, but not in the way I expected. When I told my family over dinner, the silence was immediate, like someone had turned off the volume in the room. My father finally said, "Logistics, right? Maybe admin work?" I shook my head. "Combat support, infantry track." He looked at me like I'd said I wanted to move to Mars. My mother set her fork down. "Thomas," he just leaned back in his chair, smirked, and said, "You won't last a month." That was always his tone with me, not furious, not loud, just dismissive. Like I was an echo of something lesser. A girl playing soldier, a shadow, but I didn't react. I never really did with Thomas. Instead, I packed my duffel bag and reported to basic 2 weeks later. And everything changed. I wasn't fast, I wasn't strong, but I was stubborn. I didn't collapse during the night hikes, even when the skin on my heels peeled off like paper. I didn't drop the rifle during drills, even when my arms trembled from holding it overhead in the sun. I didn't quit, not once. And when it came time to qualify on the range, I shot tighter groups than anyone in my unit. The instructors started paying attention, not with praise, just the kind of quiet nod you get when someone realizes you're not bluffing. I remember the first time I fired the M110. The recoil punched my shoulder hard enough to knock the wind out of me, but I didn't blink. I walked back to the barracks that night with a bruise blooming dark and red on my upper arm. It looked like the mark of something ancient, and I didn't ice it. I wanted it to stay. By the end of training, they didn't call me by name anymore. They just said, "West." Like it meant something, like I belonged. I kept that bruise a secret, even from the other women in my squad. Pain was a language no one needed translated. We all spoke it. Thomas never called, not once. But I did get a letter from my mother around week 6. She said Dad hoped I'd get it out of my system. She said Thomas bet I'd come home early. I kept that letter. Not because I believed them, but because I knew one day it would mean something that I didn't listen. A few months later, I was deployed. I stood at the edge of a tarmac in Kuwait, wind whipping sand into my eyes, and I knew I wasn't the little girl in the barn anymore, stacking cans and hoping to be noticed. I was a soldier, and I had just begun. Afghanistan, 2009. We landed just before dawn. The heat hadn't kicked in yet, but the dust was already clinging to everything: gear, skin, lungs. It wasn't like the training grounds back home. Nothing was polished, nothing was predictable. I remember the way the light hit the mountains, harsh, jagged outlines like broken teeth. There was no welcome party, just wind, silence, and the thrum of tension humming through the air like a wire pulled too tight. I was 23, the youngest on my team, the only woman in our squad, and no one knew what to do with me. They didn't say it, of course, not directly, but the looks were enough. I wasn't what they expected when they heard a sniper was being assigned to their unit. My CO introduced me flatly. This is West. She shoots better than you, so get over it. They didn't get over it. Not right away. My first post was Overwatch outside a village near the Kunar River. The temperature dropped below freezing at night and spiked to over 100 by afternoon. We were camped on a ridge above a winding road often used for supply drops and ambushes. I took position behind a crumbled wall, wedged between shale and thorn bushes, staring through a scope for hours. The cold seeped through my gloves. The stone dug into my ribs, and still I didn't move. That first night, nothing happened. The second night, same. But on the third, around 0340, something shifted. I spotted them just beyond the dry creek bed. A flash of metal, too controlled to be wildlife, too calm to be friendly. 3 men with rifles, lying prone. One had eyes locked on our convoy route. I exhaled. Not loudly, just enough to steady the pulse in my trigger finger. 1,200 meters, wind coming in from the north at 6 knots. Angle of elevation, 2.5 degrees. I didn't think, I calculated. When I squeezed the trigger, the shot cracked through the cold air like it didn't belong in this world. 1 body dropped. 2 scattered. I adjusted, inhaled once, and fired again. The second man fell face first into the dirt. The third never came back into view. Seconds later, the comms lit up. What the hell was that? They found the bodies at sunrise. Both clean shots. 1 between the eyes, 1 through the throat. I didn't say much. I just sat quietly as the team stared. Later that day, I heard one of the guys mutter under his breath, "West. She's the ghost." It stuck. After that, the looks changed. They still didn't talk to me like one of them, but they stopped doubting. When I walked past, silence followed. Not out of disrespect, out of something close to reverence. But no one called home to tell my parents, and Thomas never asked. Still, I kept going. Another mission, another ridge, another night lying in the dirt, watching a world that didn't know I was there. In the quiet between breaths and crosshairs, I found something strange. Not peace exactly, but purpose. I wasn't chasing approval anymore. I wasn't trying to prove Thomas wrong. I was doing the job, and I was doing it well. The day I was promoted to major, the sun was blinding. We stood on the parade grounds, uniforms sharp, boots polished to the point of reflecting sky. I didn't smile. Not because I wasn't proud, but because it didn't feel real yet. The rank didn't change who I was. It just confirmed what I'd already proven. 1 mission at a time, 1 breath, 1 trigger pull, 1 silent night on Overwatch. The CO called my name. Staff Sergeant Grace West, by order of the Department of the Army. I stepped forward, steady, focused. I didn't fidget like some of the others. I kept my spine straight and my shoulders relaxed. That's something I learned early. You can't control how they see you, but you can control how you hold yourself. The moment the silver oak leaf was pinned to my chest, a ripple of quiet respect moved through the ranks. Some clapped, a few nodded. Commander Ashford gave me a glance, not a smile, but something firmer. Like a nod between warriors. Afterward, there was a reception. Nothing fancy, just paper cups of lukewarm coffee and half-stale sheet cake on a folding table under a makeshift tent. That's where I saw Thomas. He had flown in for the ceremony. Our mother asked him to. He stood off to the side, arms crossed, sunglasses on despite the shade. He didn't approach until most of the officers had dispersed. "Major, huh?" he said. The corner of his mouth twitching like he wanted to smirk, but thought better of it. I nodded. "Yeah." He sipped from his cup, then said it, soft, casual, but sharpened like a nail under velvet. "Guess luck finally landed your way." I didn't answer, because there was nothing I could say that wouldn't widen the gap between us. And maybe I hoped, foolishly, that time would make him proud, or at least quiet. But it didn't. Thomas had always been the one who won things early. The medals, the praise, the front row seats in life. I had been the afterthought. The girl with the ragged jeans and calloused fingers who cleaned up after his tantrums. Now the roles were reversed. He had a job at a contracting firm. He wore expensive watches and leather shoes that never touched real dust. He posted filtered photos in front of American flags, but never signed up to stand under one in a combat zone. And me? I had been on 6 deployments, earned 3 commendations, and just got handed a rank most people spend decades chasing. He saw that, and he hated that he saw it. I remember the way his eyes narrowed, not with disgust, but with something worse, discomfort. Like he didn't know who I was anymore, or maybe he did, and that was the problem. He left before the cake was cut. Didn't say goodbye, didn't hug me, just walked back to his rental car, checked his phone, and disappeared into traffic. And I stood there in my pressed uniform, hands still at my sides, watching the spot where he'd been. I knew, right then, that some rifts don't make a sound when they open. They just grow, quietly, inevitably, until there's no way back across. But I also knew I didn't need his approval anymore, because that silver oak leaf on my chest wasn't just a rank, it was a line in the sand, and I had earned every inch of it. It had been years since we stood side by side in public, but there we were, me and Thomas, under flickering fluorescent lights, in the middle of a crowded gun store on a Saturday afternoon. He was the one who suggested it. "Let's swing by, see what they've got in stock," he said, already knowing this place catered to a certain kind of crowd, swagger heavy, testosterone thick, where the louder you talked, the more people listened. I didn't protest. I'd been back stateside for 3 months, still adjusting to civilian air. I figured, if nothing else, it would be a way to keep the peace between us. But peace was never what Thomas really wanted. Not with me. We walked in, and immediately he turned the volume up. "This," he said loudly, throwing an arm around my shoulders, "is my little sister. You know what she's great at." He didn't wait for anyone to respond. "Cleaning guns." There was a beat, then a low chuckle from the counter. "She polish 'em too?" someone asked. "Only if you ask real nice," another added. Laughter spread like spilled oil, fast, messy, and hard to clean up. I heard the thump of hands slapping shoulders, the kind of laughter that was less about humor and more about dominance. Thomas grinned wider. "I mean, look at her. Always been the meticulous type. Careful fingers, real steady. Perfect for keeping a barrel clean, but let's not get ahead of ourselves. She ain't here to buy anything real." My face didn't change. I shifted the strap on my shoulder, let my fingers brush the frayed patch on my jacket. Same spot it had always been. Ghost viper. The edges were worn smooth from time and repetition, but the shape remained, unmistakable to those who knew. None of them did. A woman near the glass case looked up from a pink-handled pistol and gave me that tired smile, the one you give a child pretending to be a grown-up. "You thinking of picking something out today, honey?" she asked, her tone syrup thick. Behind her, a guy in a tight black t-shirt nudged his friend and nodded at me. "She looks like she walked out of a thrift shop, not a range," he muttered. "Probably just here for Instagram pics." Thomas leaned closer and said under his breath, but not quietly enough, "Just roll with it. They'll back off once they get the joke." Except it wasn't a joke to me. I scanned the room. People had started watching. Not to see what I'd do, but to enjoy the spectacle, like they were waiting for the next punchline. I let the silence stretch. I walked slowly to the rifle wall, letting my boots land soft on the tile. One step, another, calm, measured. And then I placed both hands on the glass. The laughter behind me thinned, confused now. I wasn't laughing. I wasn't blushing. I wasn't turning to leave. I was still, that kind of stillness you learn in the field, when noise draws fire and calm keeps you breathing. A guy near the optics table tried to fill the space. "Hey, sweetheart, don't worry, we got some cute ones in the back. Something lightweight, maybe pink?" Thomas snorted. I didn't answer, not yet, because I didn't need to. Not with words, not in that moment. I just waited. And the room didn't know it yet, but their laughter had already peaked. What came next would not be a punchline. It would be the truth, and it would be deafening. Thomas didn't stop. He never did when there was a crowd. We were standing near the display case now, rows of rifles laid out beneath glass like trophies in a museum no one respected. My fingers hovered just above the surface, calm, steady, as I scanned each piece. But Thomas had already decided the show wasn't over. He jabbed his finger toward my shoulder, loud enough for half the room to hear. "You see that? That little patch?" I didn't turn. He kept going. "Piece of frayed cloth. Looks like something she glued on for Halloween. Means nothing." Another guy chuckled. It's probably a souvenir. Army surplus flea market stuff. That thing, Thomas said, pointing again, doesn't mean anything here. Not in a place where people actually know how to shoot. A few heads turned. Not many, but enough. I could feel their eyes settle on the patch. Ghost viper. The stitching was loose at the edge, the color almost bleached from too many hours in the sun, soaked with sweat and time. It was the kind of insignia no one wore unless they earned it the hard way. The kind of insignia no one asked about unless they were ready for the weight of the answer. I said nothing. Instead, I slipped my hand inside my bag and pulled out the field rifle I brought with me. Not the prettiest gun in the room, not the biggest, but every inch of it had a purpose. I laid it on the counter in front of me and unzipped the side pouch. No one said a word yet. Maybe they were still waiting for me to take the bait. Maybe they didn't realize the mood had shifted. I flipped the bolt open. The click was soft but unmistakable. My hands moved with the rhythm I'd spent years mastering. Slide, release, check chamber, inspect for carbon. My breathing stayed level. No wasted motion, no performance, just the process. Just the truth. Look at her, Thomas said again, a little sharper this time, like my silence was making him nervous. She thinks putting her hands on a rifle makes her one of us. I didn't flinch. I removed the mag, checked the spring tension, then placed it down gently. Then the grip, firm, reliable. Notched from years of use but never replaced. I disassembled each piece like it was muscle memory, because it was. And somewhere in the background, the laughter started thinning. Someone coughed. Another cleared their throat. It didn't stop entirely, but it slowed. Enough for the air to feel different. "Come on," someone muttered quietly. "She's just showing off." "No," someone else replied under their breath. "That's not showing off, that's training." Thomas didn't say anything else. Not yet. I finished with the trigger assembly. My fingers moved slow, deliberate, almost like I was handling something fragile. I wasn't. And still, I didn't speak. Because the silence was working harder than any word I could offer. Let them laugh. Let them guess. I'd been mocked before. But the thing about silence is, it waits. And when it answers, it never whispers. I had just finished laying the last part of the rifle on the counter when a voice cut through the uneasy quiet. "All right, lady," the man said, stepping forward from a knot of onlookers near the entrance. He was broad-shouldered, mid-40s maybe, wearing a tactical vest he didn't need and an ego that barely fit through the door. "Let's see if you can actually shoot." I didn't look at him. I didn't have to. His voice gave everything away. The kind of man who measured power by volume, who thought challenge was the same as authority. He slapped a silver coin onto the glass counter in front of me, a quarter. "There's a coin hanging on the wire out back. 150 meters. No one's ever hit it." A few snickers echoed from behind him. A teenage boy with a vape pen let out a low whistle. "That's not even fair. She probably can't lift the rifle, let alone use it." The man smirked. "Exactly. But hey, if she's so good at cleaning it, maybe she can polish the coin after she misses." The room shifted. The crowd, moments ago just amused spectators, leaned forward. Phones came out. Elbows nudged. People smelled blood. They were hungry for a show. Thomas didn't say a word. He just stood off to the side, arms folded, jaw clenched so tight it looked like it hurt. He wasn't laughing now, but he wasn't stopping it either. I looked down at the coin, then up at the man. "I'll take the shot," I said quietly. My voice didn't boom. It didn't need to. The man raised an eyebrow. "What's that?" I met his eyes. I said, "I'll take the shot." There was a pause. Just long enough for the room to absorb it. Just long enough for their anticipation to slip sideways into something else. He tried to laugh it off. "Sure, okay. You brought your own gear? Or you want a rental? We've got something light, maybe pink, maybe with a scope that doesn't rattle." I ignored him. I reached back into my bag and reassembled the rifle without a word. One by one, each piece slid into place with practiced ease. It wasn't a performance. It wasn't even a demonstration. It was routine. Click, slide, lock. It was done in under a minute. A few people nearby whispered. Someone cleared their throat. Then I picked up the rifle and walked toward the back door without waiting for approval. The manager called out, "You'll need a spotter," but I kept walking. Someone else shouted, "Hey, she's serious?" Someone answered, I think she is. By the time I stepped onto the gravel lot out back, the crowd had already started following. I could hear their footsteps on the floorboards, then the metal creak of the back door swinging wide. Dust kicked up in the dry air. The afternoon sun was sharp against my shoulders. There it was, the wire strung across the far end of the range. A single quarter dangled at the center, twisting slightly with the wind. The man who had thrown the coin leaned against the railing, arms crossed. "Tell you what," he said loudly, "if she hits it, I'll mop this place with my tongue." Laughter again, but thinner now. Because no one was entirely sure I wouldn't. And for the first time that day, the room, what had once been all mockery and noise, shifted into something new, suspense. I stepped out onto the gravel, rifle in hand, and the air changed. It wasn't the heat, it was still dry and sharp, the kind of afternoon where sweat dries before it touches your skin. It wasn't the light either, though the sun hung high and harsh, flattening every shadow. No, it was the silence, the kind that doesn't come from quiet, but from attention. The crowd had followed me. Some stood just beyond the back door. Others pressed against the railing along the range, cell phones ready, murmurs trailing behind them like static. The man who'd thrown the challenge leaned against the far end of the porch, smug but shifting. His arms were crossed tighter now, his jokes had dried up. I walked to the bench. No rush, no drama. The quarter dangled 150 meters downrange, clipped to a thin wire. It twirled lazily in the breeze, catching flashes of sunlight like a signal, taunting in its stillness. I knelt, set the rifle down, tucked in tight against my shoulder. Wind, 3 knots from the right. Humidity, low. Air density, crisp. My fingers adjusted the scope, the reticle leveled. My heartbeat slowed, not from nerves, but from muscle memory. I'd done this before, not with spectators, not with phones, but under fire, in silence, on rooftops, from mountainsides. The quarter shimmered in the crosshairs, so small it barely existed. I breathed in, held, let it settle. Time flattened, and I squeezed the trigger. The crack was sharp, clean, not like the thunderous, echoing kind of shot you hear in movies. It was more precise than that, like someone had snapped a thread. The coin jerked midair, twisted, then split. 2 silver halves fluttered down, one to the left, one to the right. They hit the dirt with no fanfare, no sound, and for a moment, nothing happened. The world held its breath. Then, gasps, audible, sharp. Someone cursed under their breath. A phone slipped from someone's fingers and hit the ground with a soft clack. No one laughed, not now. Because what they had just witnessed wasn't showmanship. It wasn't performance. It was precision. Earned, practiced, lived. I stood slowly, brushed the dust from my knee. Didn't gloat, didn't look for approval. I slung the rifle across my shoulder like I'd done 1,000 times before, and turned back toward the building. People parted without being asked. The crowd that had circled me like sharks now stepped aside like they were afraid to touch the air I walked through. The man who'd issued the challenge. He stayed leaning on the post, but his arms had dropped. His expression wasn't anger. It was something closer to awe. One of the younger guys whispered, "Did you see that?" To no one in particular, I didn't respond, because I didn't come here to impress. I came to breathe, to remember who I was and who I still am, and to remind a few people, my brother included, that silence does not mean weakness. Sometimes it just means you're waiting for the right moment, and when that moment comes, you don't need to raise your voice. You just need one clean shot. I had barely taken 3 steps toward the counter when the front door opened behind me. Not a gusty, dramatic swing. Just the solid sound of presence, of someone who didn't need noise to command attention. I turned, and there he was, Commander William Hayes. His uniform still immaculate, though retirement had softened the lines in his face. The medals on his chest didn't clang, they didn't need to. They whispered stories most people in that store couldn't begin to imagine. I hadn't seen him in years, but some people never stop radiating gravity. He stepped inside, scanned the room with a glance that felt like a sweep of light. Every pair of eyes that had moments ago been on me shifted, straightened. Even the man who'd tossed the coin looked down. Commander William's eyes stopped on me. Not my face, not my hands, but my left shoulder, the patch. Faded. Washed out from years of sun and sand and sweat. Barely legible anymore. Just a stitched silhouette of a hawk and a number, West 045. He froze, and then slowly, deliberately, he stood at attention. His boots clicked. His spine straightened. And in front of everyone, without hesitation, he saluted. A crisp, sharp movement, not out of politeness, not for show, but out of respect. Major West, he said. His voice was quiet but unwavering. The bravest we ever had. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was dense. The air thickened. You could hear it, the nothing. No phones buzzed. No footsteps shuffled. No coughs, no laughter. Just stillness. My brother Thomas had been leaning against the wall, smug a minute ago. Now he looked like the floor had shifted beneath him. His hand, which had just pointed at me in mockery, slowly fell to his side. He didn't speak. Couldn't. Because what do you say when the man who led entire operations across hostile borders just saluted the sister you ridiculed? What do you say when the phrase, "she just cleans guns," is crushed beneath the weight of actual history? The people around us, most of them younger, a few veterans themselves, stood frozen in their awkwardness. Someone near the ammo counter whispered, "Major?" Like he'd just realized he'd made a mistake big enough to echo. I didn't salute back. Not because I didn't want to, but because Commander William wasn't saluting my rank. He was saluting the patch, the past, the memory of nights under a burning sky, of dust in our lungs and radios whispering danger. He was saluting the times I stayed behind on a crumbling rooftop to cover a retreat. The time I refused to leave a wounded interpreter. The time I called in fire on my own position because it was the only way to get our convoy out. He was saluting everything no one in this room saw, but that he remembered. My voice was steady, even as my throat tightened. "Sir," I said. "It's good to see you," he nodded. Eyes still locked on me. "You always did let your actions speak." Then, just as calmly as he had entered, he lowered his salute, stepped past the stunned crowd, and disappeared into the aisles. The door hadn't even closed behind him when the murmurs started. But they didn't sound the same anymore. No mockery, no laughter, just hushed questions, a few apologies mouthed across the room. And Thomas, he didn't look at me again. He couldn't. Because there are truths no amount of family bitterness can stand against. And one of them had just walked in, saluted me, and reminded everyone who I truly was. The door had closed behind Commander William, but the room hadn't moved. It was like someone had hit pause on every breath, every thought. Then, a voice near the back, barely louder than a whisper. "Wait, is that really her?" Another voice responded, hushed but sharp. "Can't be. Maybe he mistook her for someone else." "Did you see that patch?" Another added, doubt laced in their tone. "Could have been from a surplus bin." The words bounced around the store like sparks looking for dry wood. I stayed where I was. I didn't flinch, but inside, I felt it. That old pull in my gut, the one that reminded me, battle isn't always fought with bullets. Sometimes it's fought with stares, with whispers, with that look that says you don't belong here. A man behind the counter scratched his beard. "I don't get it," he said. "She just cleaned a gun and hid a coin. Cool trick. But a major? You don't salute tricks," someone near him murmured. There was a short silence before another voice cut through. This one came from a younger woman, maybe late 20s, wearing a faded Marine Corps hoodie. "My brother was in the 14th Recon," she said slowly. "He talked about a West, Grace West. Said she pulled his squad out near Kajaki Dam, 2010 or so. Said she never missed." Heads turned. Eyes flicked back to me. And that's when it began to fracture, the disbelief giving way to recognition for some, and for others, doubling down. "I still don't buy it," a tall man in the back said, arms crossed. "Could be staged. You know how people make things go viral now. Maybe the commander was in on it, seen weirder things. But why would he fake that?" the woman asked. "You saw how he looked at her. I've seen actors cry on command too. Laughter, uncomfortable, dry. No one joined in. Someone else chimed in from behind the ammo shelf. If she's who he said she is, why isn't she on TV? Why isn't her name in the news? Because we don't ask for cameras, I thought. Because we serve and disappear. I said nothing. I reached down, opened the case beside me, and calmly began disassembling the rifle again. Bolt, spring, scope. Each piece cleaned with deliberate care. The murmurs kept rising and falling, some skeptical, some stunned. A man in flannel said to no one in particular, "I think that was the guy from the 11th Joint Task Force. You remember the op in Bagram?" Another replied, "Yeah, and she was there too, right? Operation Ashfall? I thought she didn't survive that." I looked up at that. And Thomas. He hadn't said a word. His face had gone pale, lips parted but no sound. The pride he carried into this store like armor now hung like a burden. Because nothing stings more than seeing the lie you believed in your whole life begin to collapse in public. He wasn't angry, not now. He was small. I could feel the divide beginning, not just between me and him, but between everyone in that store. Lines were being drawn, those who questioned me, and those who believed what they saw. And somewhere in the tension, the truth wasn't just about me anymore. It was about what people choose to see. I don't remember the exact day Thomas started pulling away from me, but I remember the moment he decided I'd stolen something from him. It was the night I got my promotion orders. Major, U.S. Army. I'd just stepped off a long-range patrol rotation and hadn't even unpacked my gear when Mom called. Her voice cracked with pride. "You did it, baby," she said. "Major Grace West." She told everyone. Dad called right after, booming with joy. He said, "You're the first in the family to make major. Thomas will be so proud." I should have known, because the next family dinner, something had shifted. We were seated around the table. The TV in the background replayed a segment about women in combat roles. My name came up in passing. Someone had submitted it to a local feature on decorated female officers. Thomas was quiet. He just kept chewing, slow and stiff. Then Dad, not reading the room, added, "See, son, that's how you serve your country with purpose." And just like that, something inside Thomas snapped. It wasn't loud. He didn't yell or flip the table. He just smiled. Too wide, too still. He said, "Yeah, Grace always gets lucky." That word stuck to me like a burr. At first, I brushed it off. Maybe he was just tired. Maybe he meant it as a joke. But the pattern grew, subtle, then sharp. At Uncle Rick's birthday barbecue, when someone asked what I did, he cut in. "She's in the Army, but don't let that fool you. Mostly behind a desk. The real soldiers don't type reports." When I came back from a deployment, he told my friend Lisa, "It's not like she's kicking down doors. Probably just pushing paper and getting medals for it." He knew the truth. He knew the missions. He read the same citations. But that didn't matter. He wasn't trying to know me. He was trying to undo me. At one point, I confronted him. I asked, "Why are you doing this?" He shrugged. "You really think I don't hear Mom comparing us? Every time I walk through that door, it's Grace this, Grace that. It's like I stopped existing when you put on that uniform." I stood there, holding my breath. He added, "You got their respect, Grace. And you didn't even ask for it. I've been trying my whole life, but you? You just show up and suddenly you're a hero." I didn't know what to say. Because I couldn't undo how our parents felt. I couldn't hand him what he thought he'd lost. I couldn't make them stop being proud of me. But I told him the truth. "I never wanted to compete with you, Thomas. I just wanted you to stand with me." He didn't answer. After that, he kept his distance, but not his silence. He started seeding doubt among the cousins. He told Aunt Marjorie that most of my medals were ceremonial. He told a neighbor that I never saw real combat. He told an old classmate I probably just got lucky, again and again. And the worst part? People believed him. Or at least they didn't question it. Because when a lie comes wrapped in brotherly closeness, it sounds like insight. It sounds like truth. That's how betrayal works. It doesn't come from your enemies. It comes from someone who remembers the house you grew up in. From someone who knows your favorite cereal and the way your voice cracked when you first gave a speech in 8th grade. It comes from your brother. And it hurts more than anything the battlefield ever threw at me. It started with a letter, a formal envelope from a loan office I'd never heard of, stamped "Final Notice." At first I thought it was a mistake. I had no debts. My credit was clean. I hadn't co-signed anything for anyone. But when I opened it, I saw my name, printed in bold. Grace Elizabeth West, listed as a guarantor for a $45,000 small business loan, taken out 18 months earlier. The signature at the bottom wasn't mine. It was shaky, slightly off, but it mimicked my hand just enough to pass a casual glance. I stared at the page for a long time, my breath caught. The room felt like it tilted sideways. I didn't need to guess who had done it. Thomas. I remembered months earlier how he casually asked me over dinner about credit limits and veteran-owned business perks. How he laughed it off when I said I'd never put my name on anything unless I fully understood the risk. How he smiled and said, Yeah, you've always been the cautious one. And I remembered the moment I told him my social was locked tight. I'd frozen it after a breach at the VA. He'd nodded, distracted, filing that away. Now, my name was tied to a debt I didn't take. A legal document I never signed. And a brother who never once asked for permission. The betrayal hit different this time. In combat, you expect the enemy to come from the other side of the wire. At home, you expect trust. You expect protection. And instead, I got forged. It wasn't just emotional anymore. It was legal, financial, personal in a way that left scars you can't see on a scan. I could have called him immediately. I could have stormed over to his house and demanded answers, thrown the letter in his face. But something in me paused. Maybe it was the army in me. Maybe it was the sniper instinct. You don't act on anger. You observe, you calculate, you gather proof. So I called the loan office. I asked questions with a calm voice and a notepad in hand. The manager confirmed everything. He thought I was a co-signer. He sent scanned copies of the original application. I saw the forged signature again, the same shaky mimicry. The same lie. I didn't cry. Instead, I ordered a full credit report. I pulled bank records. I dug through everything Thomas had ever casually mentioned over the last 2 years. And the picture sharpened. Failed ventures, unpaid vendors, a ghost LLC that never actually operated. He wasn't just drowning. He was dragging me down with him. That night, I sat at my kitchen table and stared at an old photo of us, me in uniform, him in jeans and a flannel, arms slung over my shoulder like he still believed we were on the same team. I felt hollow. I wasn't just betrayed by blood. I was weaponized. But I didn't confront him, not yet, because I wasn't going to react emotionally and let him twist the story. I was going to move in silence, just like I learned during my long nights in Overwatch. You wait. You align the scope. And when the moment's right, you act with precision. So I kept my voice calm, kept the photo face down, and started collecting every piece of truth that would one day speak louder than his excuses ever could. There's a silence only snipers know. It's not just the absence of sound. It's the pause between breath and decision. The heartbeat before the trigger pulls. The moment when the world balances on your fingertips, and one small squeeze could end a life, or save one. I've spent nights wrapped in that silence, flat on my stomach in some crag above an Afghan ravine, sweat freezing on my back, scope trained on a heat signature that might have been a threat, or a herder. My spotter would say nothing. We'd wait for wind, movement, verification. And in those hours of stillness, I had to learn how to separate instinct from impulse, rage from reason, duty from destruction. Sometimes I made the call, sometimes I didn't, but I never forgot any of them. And now, sitting in my own kitchen, thousands of miles from those mountains, with my brother's betrayal echoing like a shot in a canyon, I felt that silence again. It wasn't war, but it hurt worse, because war is impersonal. Betrayal, that has a face, a voice, a childhood memory, and it cuts deeper than any bullet ever could. I kept picturing Thomas's smirk in the gun store, his mocking tone, the way he weaponized my silence like it meant I had nothing to say. But he didn't understand the silence I came from. He didn't know that silence wasn't weakness. It was calculation. It was restraint. It was a skill honed under stars in enemy territory. I'd learned long ago, when everyone else gets loud, you go still. You find your center. And mine was starting to crack. I thought about those words I used to whisper to myself on long deployments. Forgiveness is harder than pulling a trigger. And it was true. A trigger is clean. It's simple. One motion, and it's over. But forgiveness, that festers. It unspools in your chest. It demands that you carry what someone else should have owned, that you bleed for their mistake and call it grace. I didn't know if I could do it. Every part of me wanted to storm Thomas's house, lay the documents on the table, and ask him how many more parts of me he planned to sell before he felt whole. But I knew that would just give him another excuse, another story to twist, another scene to perform in. And I was done being in his audience, so I went quiet again. I thought back to one particular night in 2011. The rain was slamming sideways against the rocks. My target was moving through a canyon. I had a 6-second window, just 6 seconds. And I waited too long. My finger hovered, breathing shallow. When I finally took the shot, it was clean, precise, but late. We lost a convoy that night because of my hesitation. I carried that guilt for years, and yet I never apologized for waiting, because I needed to be sure. I needed to know that when I pulled the trigger, it was necessary. Right. That's how I felt now. This time, the battlefield was my own family. The target wasn't a hostile. It was heartbreak, fraud, ego. And I wasn't about to act without certainty. I would gather every fact, document every lie. And when the moment came, I would move. Not out of vengeance, but out of justice. Because forgiveness may be harder than pulling a trigger. But truth, when delivered with steady hands and a calm voice, can dismantle even the most carefully constructed lie. I field-stripped rifles under fire, reassembled weapons in the dark, and diagnosed a jammed bolt with nothing but instinct and feel. That same patience, the mechanical discipline of disassembly and reassembly, became my greatest asset in uncovering the truth. Except this time, the weapon wasn't metal. It was paperwork. And the enemy wasn't on a ridge in the distance. He shared my last name. I started with the call logs. I'd requested them quietly through my lawyer, Susan Lee, an old army jag with a sharp eye and zero tolerance for nonsense. "We go slow," she said, sliding a yellow legal pad across her desk, like building a case against a corrupt contractor. "Paper trail first, emotion last." I nodded. My palms were cold. Thomas had used my name, my military credentials, and a forged version of my signature to co-sign for a business loan. The bank, unfamiliar with the nuances of stolen valor, had approved it without blinking. My rank, my credit, my record. They opened doors. I never realized he was walking through them behind my back. Susan pulled out a document. "Initials on this page. See how they slant upward?" I leaned closer. She handed me a magnifier. "Compare that to yours." I didn't need to. I already knew. The signature wasn't mine, but it looked close enough to pass at first glance. That's what made it dangerous. Like a misaligned scope, off by a fraction, but enough to kill the wrong target. We went through financial records next. Withdrawals, deposits, real estate applications. 3 vehicles registered to my name in states I'd never lived in. All tied back to an LLC Thomas had created 6 months prior, listing me as a silent partner. Silent because I had no idea it existed. I sat back, breath heavy. "He planned this," Susan nodded. "He's not just sloppy, he's strategic." It felt like cleaning a rifle and finding metal shavings in the barrel, evidence of sabotage, of deliberate wear. I thought about the day he mocked me at the gun store, pointing to the patch on my shoulder like it was a joke. I remembered the crowd's laughter, how he basked in it, needing validation, but this wasn't about public humiliation anymore. This was financial warfare. I requested a copy of every document filed under my name in the past year. Susan submitted the subpoenas. We brought in a handwriting analyst, a forensic accountant. Piece by piece, we laid the components on the table: names, dates, signatures, transactions. Every connection, every lie, snapped into place. And when we stepped back, we didn't see a mess. We saw a map of betrayal. Thomas hadn't just borrowed my identity. He had built a life on it, a debt-ridden life, one he never intended to repay. And the worst part? He knew I wouldn't report him, not right away, not until the damage was irreversible. That's what he counted on. But Thomas forgot one thing. I don't pull triggers out of anger. I pull them when the mission is clear, when the shot is necessary, when the fallout is justified. So I tightened my jaw, picked up the final folder, and looked Susan in the eye. Let's go to war. Courtrooms are nothing like the movies. They don't echo with dramatic music. No one stands up yelling objection with righteous fury. No, they're quiet, controlled, cold. Like sniper wind. And I knew how to breathe in wind like that. The morning Thomas was arraigned, I arrived early. Not in uniform, just a dark blazer and slacks. Civilian, quiet, clean. My patch wasn't visible, but it didn't have to be. My spine held it now. He entered the courtroom in cuffs. Not shackled, just wrists. But even so, the clink of metal was louder than anything else. He avoided looking at me. His lawyer mumbled something about a misunderstanding, about how Thomas had meant to secure a business venture in honor of his sister's military legacy. I didn't blink. The prosecutor stood. This is not about a misunderstanding, she said, voice sharp but steady. This is identity fraud, grand larceny, intent to deceive. She laid out the documents we had compiled. Forged signatures, illegally obtained credit, fake LLC listings. He had used my social security number, my DD-214 form, even a fake military email to make it look like I had authorized it all. My face burned, but not with shame, with clarity. I watched Thomas. He slouched deeper into his chair with each piece of evidence, like the weight was real now, not just paper, not just digital numbers, real. The gallery wasn't full, but enough people were there. A few from the gun store, some veterans who had served with our family. I recognized a woman from our old neighborhood, Mrs. Rowley, who used to bring casseroles when we were kids. She looked from Thomas to me, confused, like someone had reversed the labels on jars. Whispers rose as the photos of signatures were shown side by side. That's not her writing. He did all that with her name? Why would a brother? Some looked at me with sympathy. Some looked at him with disgust. But others weren't sure who to believe. The doubt always lingers, especially when women speak out, even if they hold the truth like a rifle aimed straight. The judge listened carefully. He asked few questions. Then he turned to Thomas. Mr. West, do you dispute that these documents were falsified using your sister's identity? Thomas didn't answer at first. His jaw moved, but no sound came. The judge repeated the question. This time, Thomas looked at me. For a second, I saw something in his eyes I hadn't seen in years. Not guilt, not regret, fear. The documents were mine, he said. I used her name. I thought I could fix it before it got this far. The judge nodded. Thank you for your honesty. It may serve you in sentencing, or not. He banged the gavel once. Trial will proceed to full review next week. Bail denied. I stood as they took Thomas away. His head hung low. He didn't fight, didn't beg, didn't even glance at me again. Outside, reporters gathered. I walked past them in silence. My story wasn't for headlines. It was for my own reckoning. Because sometimes justice isn't about victory. It's about facing what hurts, in public, without flinching. The courthouse hallway was emptying. Most people drifted out in murmurs, like smoke thinning in cold air. The echo of their steps faded down the polished floor. I remained seated on the bench, staring at the scuffed tips of my shoes, hands folded in my lap, still and steady. Then I heard it, the soft shuffle of chains, the tread of boots. I looked up. Thomas was being escorted past by 2 deputies. He was cuffed, no longer in the press suit he'd worn earlier, but in a beige detention jumpsuit, loose at the shoulders, the color washing him out. He looked smaller. The deputy guiding him paused near the exit door, as if sensing something unspoken. Thomas turned toward me. The deputies held his arms gently but firmly, not rough, not yet. And then for the first time in a long time, he met my eyes. No flash of anger, no smirk, no defense, just stillness. His lips parted, dry and hesitant. Grace, he said quietly. I messed up. His voice cracked on the second word. Not loudly, not performatively. It wasn't for show. It wasn't to win anyone over. It wasn't even an apology. It was something smaller, quieter, real. I stood, not abruptly, calmly. I walked 3 slow steps toward him. close enough that I could feel the warmth of memory between us, but not the closeness of forgiveness. I didn't answer right away. I looked at him, I really looked. At the boy I used to protect on the playground. At the teenager who used to sneak me licorice on tough training days. At the man who had laughed when others doubted me, but also the man who had signed my name on fraudulent forms and watched me nearly fall for it. I saw all of it. And yet, I didn't hate him. Pain? Yes. Loss? Deeply. But hate? No. I nodded once. It wasn't forgiveness, it was acknowledgement of the truth, of his words, of the fracture between us, and the thin, sharp glint of something trying to heal. I know, I said softly. And now you do too. His eyes welled. He blinked fast, trying not to let it spill. Pride dies slow, especially in brothers. The deputy gave him a gentle nudge. Thomas turned away, but before he disappeared through the heavy door, he looked back once. His mouth moved, forming something silent. Maybe thank you, maybe sorry, maybe just my name again. I didn't need to hear it. I already carried the weight. But for the first time, I wasn't carrying it alone. When the doors closed behind him, I sat back down on the bench. And I let the silence hold me, not like punishment, but like breath after battle. Justice had spoken. But healing was just beginning. The weeks after the trial passed like rainwater over old pavement, quiet but with erosion beneath the surface. Thomas lost his job 2 days after sentencing. His firm issued a cold, single-line statement about ethics violations. That was all it took. His name had once been proudly engraved on the firm's door. Now it was scrubbed from the website within hours. I heard the rest in fragments. Friends stopped calling him. His car lease was terminated. Even the neighbors, the ones who once waved warmly, now pretended not to see him at the mailbox. He moved into a small apartment outside the city. No one told me directly, but I knew. I had always known how to find him. I didn't reach out. Not out of anger, out of necessity. I needed space. We both did. But then one morning, a letter arrived. No name on the envelope, just my address in block handwriting. I knew that script. Thomas always printed his letters like blueprints, straight lines, clean breaks. I sat with it for hours before opening it. Inside was a single page. Grace, I've been quiet for a reason. Not out of shame, though I have plenty, but because I don't know how to talk to you anymore. I used to think winning meant being louder, smarter, more admired. I thought I could erase the years where I felt small by making you feel smaller. That was my sin. But now I sit in silence most days, and it has taught me something. You never needed to win. That was never your game. You served, you sacrificed, and you stayed silent when others would have screamed. I once said you were just lucky, but the truth? I was the one trying to take shortcuts. I lost my job, my friends, my place in the world. But I think the worst loss is realizing I nearly lost my sister, and for what? For pride. I wanted to win. But I ended up beating only myself. If you never write back, I'll understand. But I needed you to hear it, from me. Not in a courtroom, not through lawyers, just from your brother. Thomas, I read it twice, then a third time. There were no excuses, no shifting of blame, just the plain architecture of regret. He hadn't asked for forgiveness, and maybe that's why I believed every word. Later that evening, I lit a candle and set the letter beside my old service medals. One of them was engraved with the words, "Honor through endurance." It felt right to place his letter there, because maybe this too was a kind of service, and maybe redemption didn't arrive with fanfare, but with quiet acknowledgement. Of failure, of consequence, and of the slow, deliberate work it takes to rebuild from the rubble you caused. I sat with the letter in my hands long after the words had settled. It wasn't forgiveness I felt first. It was weight, a kind of heaviness that filled my chest, not from grief, not from rage, but from the knowledge that something had shifted. Irrevocably. Thomas's words rang honest. Not polished, not self-serving, just real. But real didn't erase pain. I remembered the moments too well, the cold glint of my name misused on fraudulent papers, his mocking voice in the gun shop, the hollow shame I felt when others laughed, and I had to hold still. Forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting. I placed the letter on my lap and stared at the far wall, blank, like the future between us. And yet I heard Commander Williams' voice again, quiet but firm from that day long ago. Bravery isn't just in battle, Major. It's in facing family too. Back then, I thought he was speaking about honor, the duty to uphold reputation even when our name was dragged through the mud. But now I understood. He meant something deeper. He meant this moment. Facing the battlefield you didn't choose. The one shaped by bloodlines and betrayals. The one where no medal could guide you. The one where the enemy wasn't out there in the hills or across enemy lines, but someone who once held your hand at Thanksgiving dinner. I closed my eyes and remembered something from childhood. Thomas and I used to build forts in the backyard. Old sheets tied to lawn chairs. Tree branches for camouflage. He once whispered, "No matter what, we're on the same team." That promise didn't last. But maybe some part of that child remained in both of us. Scared, angry, but reaching. The hurt didn't vanish, but the wall I'd built, it cracked. Forgiveness, I've come to realize, isn't a grand gesture. It's not a speech or a dramatic tear-filled moment. It's a quiet decision to hold back judgment just long enough to see if someone might grow. It's letting the seed fall. Whether it takes root, that's not up to me. But I could stop watering the bitterness. I stood up, folded the letter gently, and placed it into a small wooden box I kept on the mantel, where I stored things that still hurt, but mattered. The patch on my jacket, the one Thomas mocked, it's still there, still frayed, still real. But that's the thing about scars and symbols. They only lose their meaning when we let others define them. The next morning, I wrote back. Not a long letter. Not even an answer to his apology. Just 6 words. Maybe one day we'll talk again. It wasn't closure, but it was a crack of light. And sometimes that's all a seed needs. I didn't tell anyone I was going. No dramatic arrival, no warning call. Just me, a plain coat, and a decision I wasn't sure I could make until I was standing in front of his door. Thomas had moved into a small rental outside town. A place with faded siding and a porch that hadn't seen paint in years. The yard was mostly weeds, and the windows looked like they hadn't been opened in weeks. He answered the door slower than I remembered. Older, smaller somehow. He didn't speak, neither did I. There was a pause, the kind that stretches out long enough for regret to creep in. But then I stepped forward, closed the space between us, and did not hug him. I simply placed my hand gently on his shoulder. His eyes flicked to mine, red-rimmed, sunken. He looked like someone who hadn't forgiven himself, not even a little. I didn't come here to take his pain away. I came because something in me had shifted, I said calmly. Justice did its part. He swallowed. Yeah, I nodded, voice steady. The rest? That's on you. He didn't argue, didn't apologize again, didn't ask for anything. That, more than anything, told me he had finally understood. This wasn't about starting over. This wasn't about pretending nothing happened. This was about living with the truth, all of it, and choosing not to run from it anymore. I let my hand fall. We stood in silence. He stepped back, giving me space to walk inside. I didn't, not yet. Instead, I let my eyes scan the porch. No mail piled up. A small broom leaned against the rail. A few empty pots, like maybe he thought about growing something. Maybe that mattered. You still have the letter I sent? I asked quietly. He reached into his pocket and pulled it out, creased, soft at the edges. I nodded. Good. I wasn't ready to say more. Maybe I never would be. But I had come. And that meant something. Forgiveness, if it was to come, wouldn't be about erasing. It would be about presence, about showing up. And I turned to leave. As I reached the steps, I heard him say behind me, You didn't have to come. I paused, then said, No, but I did. The drive home was quiet, windows down. The wind tugged at the loose strand of hair near my collar, and I let it dance. I wasn't proud of him yet, but I wasn't ashamed of myself either, and that was progress. Healing, like war, isn't clean. It's messy and slow. It demands showing up when you'd rather disappear. It requires looking at the face of someone who broke you, and realizing that pity and vengeance won't build anything new. Only choices will. I made one today, not for him, For me. The air outside the gun store was still, not quiet, not empty, just still. Like the moment before a storm or the breath you hold before a shot. I stepped out, my boots hitting the concrete with a soft, certain sound. The kind of sound that doesn't need to announce anything but leaves a mark anyway. I didn't turn back. I didn't need to. Behind me, that crowd, once full of laughter and dismissive glances, had gone silent. The same voices that mocked, now muted. I didn't crave their applause. I didn't even crave their understanding. But silence is honest. It says what words can't. Commander Williams' voice still echoed in the walls behind me. Major West, the bravest we ever had. Not loud, not dramatic, just true. That one sentence had sliced through the theater of doubt like a clean shot through wind. It wasn't just the truth about me. It was the truth about all of us who served in silence. Those who don't wear their courage on their sleeves because it lives deeper, in scars, in choices, in the discipline not to break even when broken. I passed the rusted sign that squeaked faintly in the wind. A dog barked in the distance. Some part of me noticed those things more sharply, like the world had reset its clarity. My shadow stretched long on the pavement, arms still, shoulders squared. No medals, no weapon, just presence. I walked past the row of trucks, some of the same ones from the mocking line outside. One of them had a bumper sticker that read, "Freedom isn't free." I smiled faintly, not because of the slogan, but because I knew what it cost, and who usually picked up the check. I paused at the curb, hand resting briefly on the old patch sewn into my coat. Faded now, silver thread worn down to threads of memory. It was once vibrant. It marked a mission that never made headlines. No cameras. Just 6 lives pulled from a kill zone, because I read the wind and squeezed the trigger at the exact second it mattered. That patch had seen blood, sand, and silence. It had heard the last words of a teammate and the first breath of a rescued civilian. Now it heard my heartbeat, steady. A car passed. The driver slowed, just for a second. Our eyes met. He didn't wave, he didn't smile, he just nodded. Like maybe, just maybe, he knew. Not who I was, but what I was. I kept walking. At the end of the block, the sky opened wider, the kind of blue that looks endless if you've ever flown beneath it. That's the thing about skies. They hold the weight of everything and still look light. I took one last breath before reaching my car. I didn't need to say goodbye to the gun store. It would remember. Not because of a spectacle, but because of what didn't happen. I didn't scream. I didn't retaliate. I didn't pull rank. I stood still. I shot once. I left. That's the kind of exit that doesn't vanish. It echoes, quietly, but forever. There's something I want you to know. I'm not perfect. I've made mistakes, big ones. I've carried grudges longer than I should have. I've raised my voice behind closed doors, and worse. I've stayed silent when my voice could have helped someone. But I've also learned, and the lesson that stayed with me, longer than any drill, any medal, any command, is this. Courage doesn't always sound like a war cry. Sometimes it sounds like nothing at all. Like the silence after you choose truth over vengeance. Like the breath before you forgive someone who doesn't deserve it, but needs it anyway. Like the click of a safety staying on. I could have exploded that day, let anger do the talking. I had the skills, the background, the right. I had every reason to let ego win. But I didn't. Because justice doesn't always arrive with sirens or verdicts. Sometimes it shows up in quiet reckonings, in a courtroom whisper, in a brother's eyes when he finally sees what his actions cost. In the moment the people who laughed at you can no longer look you in the eye. That is power, not the loud kind, the earned kind. If you're watching this and you've been hurt, mocked, dismissed, betrayed by someone you loved, know this. Your story isn't over just because they underestimated you. Your strength isn't measured by how loud you get, but by what you choose to do with your silence. I didn't want to become a symbol. I just wanted to walk out of that store with my dignity. But maybe that's exactly why it mattered. Because I stayed true to the version of me that I fought hard to become. And you can too. No matter who laughed, no matter who left, you are not the sum of their opinions. You are the quiet aftermath that rewrites everything they thought they knew. This story isn't about revenge. It's about justice. Not the kind that breaks bones, the kind that builds something better. Like Commander Williams said, bravery isn't just in battle, Major. It's in facing family too. I carry that with me, in my spine, in my steps, in the way I choose to move forward, even when it hurts. So I leave you with this. The patch on my jacket is old now. The threads don't shine like they used to, but that's okay. It's not meant to be loud. It's meant to remind of who I was, of what I survived, of who I still am, and maybe of who you are, too. Before we say goodbye, I'd love to know, where are you watching from? Is it a quiet morning with a warm cup of coffee? Or a late night where stories like this keep you company? Let me know in the comments. We read everyone with gratitude. And if this story touched your heart, please consider subscribing to the channel, not just to hear more stories like this, but to be part of a community that still believes in kindness, healing, and second chances. Thank you for spending your time with us today. Wherever you are, I hope you carry this story with you, and remember, sometimes the miracle doesn't knock on your door. It waits quietly until you're ready to open your heart. Take care, and I'll see you in the next story.